Paulo Costa will officially fight his next fight against Dagestan challenger Khamzat at UFC 291. But if he wins, he could face Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi in his next fight. Costa himself stated that he intends to fight 2 fights this year. Hello fighters. This is World of MMA. In today's video I will give a prediction of a potential fight between Khamzat Chimaev and Paulo Costa. But before I start the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it, so you won't miss the next videos. Here we go. Khamzat Chimaev stormed into the UFC. In recent history, since the promotion moved away from one-day tournaments, no one has managed to get 2 wins in 10 days. And not just any victory, but 2 bright and early victories. And what's even more amazing is the special attitude of Dana White, who doesn't even deny it. The UFC boss has confirmed it repeatedly. Khamzat, who was born in the Chechen Republic, moved to Sweden when he was 19 and fights for the Scandinavians. But back to MMA. After his bright debut, Boers got Gerald Meerschaert. But before that fight, the next one against the famous Damian Maia was already being discussed. The Brazilian was the 7th ranked fighter of the time, and beating him could make Khamzat even more popular. The Swede hardly needed a hype, because he is already well known to MMA fans after his outstanding debut. But a victory over an eminent opponent is another matter, because Chimaev's first 2 opponents in the UFC had only 1 victory under their belt. Meerschaert, Chimaev won by 1 punch in fact, and many said that Gerald was another sack. Tell that to Makhmud Muradov, whom the American strangled, interrupting the Uzbek fighter's streak of 14 wins. Khamzat never got the fight with Maia. He got coronavirus, recovered for a long time, and even announced the end of his career. It's a shame, because at that time it was already announced his fight against Leon Edwards, a victory over which would have practically guaranteed Boers a title shot. We had to start all over again. But in 3 fights Chimaev made such a strong statement that after more than a year of downtime, Boers got an opponent from the 11th ranked welterweight division. Khamzat didn't dominate Jean Liang, he outright humiliated him. Caught him, carried him to the goal, while conversing with White, beat him and choked him. Once again without missing a beat. Many had talked about an aura of invulnerability before, but after the fight against the Chinese, that talk intensified. In April of this year, Khamzat faced former title challenger and at the time fighter ranked number 2 in the division, Gilbert Burns. Chimaev missed more punches than he had in his entire career, exchanged a lot of punches with his opponent, fell, and completely backed away from the game plan. But most importantly, Boers showed his spirit, and 15 minutes later he scored his first career win by decision. Having beaten Burns, Khamzat had to go into the fight against Stockton gangster Nate Diaz. The fight was supposed to be at welterweight, but Khamzat was unable to make the weight due to his doctor forbidding him to raise the remaining pounds. As a result, Diaz refused to fight Chimaev, and experienced welterweight Kevin Holland came out against the Chechen. But this fight was held at intermediate weight. Khamzat started the fight with a struggle and again finished it in the first round by strangling Holland. The Brazilian, who has a record of 14-2, including 8 fights in the UFC, could have been in the elite much earlier than 2017. After 3 wins at the start of his professional career, he became a contestant on the Ultimate Fighter show, but performed poorly and left the project early, returning to his homeland. But there he quickly returned on a successful course, winning the title in the main Brazilian promotion Jungle Fight. Almost all the successful fighters of that country had performed in that organization at one time. Jose Aldo, Renan Barão, Ronaldo Souza, Fabricio Verdum. After defending his belt, Costa went straight to the UFC with 8 wins, all in the first round. In the same way he closed his debut against McClellan, with 3 more convincing victories, all coming in the second round. Paulo had the most important fight of his career at this point. Yoel Romero is an old Cuban, silver medalist of the Olympic Games in Sydney, the man who few wanted to fight, and those who did, either regretted or were not the same fighters. Costa and Soldier of God fought a 15-minute war, and the Brazilian won by decision. Yes, the judges were scolded here too, but Paulo was the #1 contender. Ironically, when Costa got injured, it was Romero who came out for the title fight. And if the fight with Paulo is one of the best fights of 2019, the 25 minutes the Cuban spent in the octagon against Adesanya everyone would like to forget. More than a year passed, and in September 2020, the Brazilian got a chance to take the title away from the Nigerian living in New Zealand. But that night Paulo was a pale shadow of himself. Or maybe Israel wanted to prove to his critics after his fight with Romero that he was still a bright champion. It took more than one round for Adesanya to knock out Paulo. After that fight, Paulo lost to Marvin Vettori and came back with a win over veteran and former UFC champion Luke Rockhold. Let's start with Khamzat Chimaev's striking technique. He only showed his striking technique in the UFC against Gilbert Burns and Gerald Meerschaert. In the Gilbert fight he fought in character and didn't look very strong. However, in the fight with Gerald he showed that he has a knockout punch. He also knocked out Ikram Aliskerov, Paulo Costa's next opponent, so the Brazilian should be wary of his knockout power. As for Paulo, it's sad. He knocked out all of his opponents in his initial fights. However, in the fight with Yoel Romero, his weaknesses were visible. You could say he lost that fight. Adesanya calmly took him apart in the stand-up, knocking him out in the second round. Then he lost to Marvin Vettori on the arm, so I doubt very much that he will be stronger on the arm against Khamzat. The favorite here I would choose Chimaev with a slight advantage, as he can fight to the end and take the win on character. Let's move on to Paulo Costa's wrestling. He doesn't use wrestling himself in his fights, but he is very good at defending against takedowns. In his fight against Vettori and Romero, he was able to defend against all the takedowns. I think his physical attributes allow him not to miss any takedowns. Khamzat's wrestling, on the other hand, is at a high level. He uses wrestling in all his fights. He has good grappling and control. He's got a lot of moves in his arsenal that will help him catch you in a submission, so Khamzat will definitely be the favorite here. In terms of stamina, I would have more faith in Paulo Costa, who went the full 5 rounds in 3 rounds. In the fight with Vettori he looked great and didn't tire in the last rounds. Khamzat, on the other hand, blew through the second half of his fight with Gilbert Burns. In terms of experience I also believe in Paulo, who fought the top fighters of this division and the champion of Adesanya. In this fight I think Khamzat Chimaev will win by submission in the second and third rounds. Paulo is not very good at wrestling and Khamzat will take advantage of that. What do you think, my friends? Write your opinion in the comments. Bye all.